Good evening. We'll start, I guess, a minute early. It's about 6:59, so let's call the Village of Webster Workshop, October 30th, 2018, to order. This evening on the agenda, we basically have one item, and that is the presentation from Barton and I'm finding it hard to pronounce it. Love Judith. It was presented to the town in a presentation about a month and a half, maybe ago. And so, in order for the village to be brought up to speed and have the same opportunity for the joint study presentation, we've asked for this presentation this evening. It is in a workshop format and forum, so it is not a public hearing, so we will not be entertaining questions from the audience as the meeting progresses. But we will listen to what is presented. We want to make sure that both boards have an opportunity to have the presentation presented. We both have the documents that have been written up and given to both boards. And we will be meeting formally, both boards, at the Webster Town Boardroom on November 29th. I believe the time may not yet be set, probably 7, unless the supervisor would like to meet earlier. I don't know. But that will be publicized probably something like 6:30 or again 7 o'clock. And that will be open to everyone to come, and the two boards at that particular time will have discussions between ourselves. Okay? So, at this point in time, I would like to ask that, Peter, you're going to be
most of it, yeah.
Presentation primarily, but both of you, that you
sure.
we go.
I don't know if I'm kind of talking to everyone's.
Yeah. I do apologize for the small room.
I'm going to stand here, I think, just so you can see the presentation and everything. So
I'll preface just before we go. We are in here. We have 3 classes of voting inspectors here on Thursday, and we have a wedding reception booked for the community room this weekend, so we were having the carpet cleaned. Today was the day to do it. So I apologize for the fact that we're here, but we're overwhelmed by the number of people that are here for a normal workshop. So at any rate, Peter.
thank you. My name is Pete Baker. I work for Barton Lagoons. I'm a project manager for the work we've done for the town in evaluating the upgrades of the treatment plant. We're actually currently, we've been retained to do the first design of the first phase. We've completed that design, been approved by DEC, and we're actually in the bidding process right now. So the first phase, the town's moving forward on upgrades within their treatment. I'm here with Ken Knudsen. I work out of the Rochester office, B&L's Rochester office. We have an office located downtown. Ken is located at our corporate headquarters in Syracuse. Again, we did do a similar presentation. I'm not sure how many people were here. I think it might have been back in December. We presented to have a joint meeting between the village and the town boards, talk about what this project is and kind of the amendments we made to the prior report. That's right. Okay. So what we've developed, the project started out with, certainly in the town's end, they've had, back in 2015, secondary clarifiers are a pretty critical component for the treatment of the wastewater that goes in the town's plant. One of the clarifiers failed. That kind of prompted some initial town vetted engineers. They looked at, we were retained by the town at that point in time. That project kind of, I say morphed, it kind of transitioned a bit into development of what we call PER. PER is known as a preliminary engineering report. So in that we created a PER pretty much looking at the treatment processes within the town, identifying where the deficiencies were, we made recommendations. The PERs, initially it's a document that kind of provides a first conceptual design, cost estimate, and it really forms the framework for potential funding applications. It's a necessary document for DEC and what was New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation, which is essentially the environmental bank of New York State. They provide funding mechanisms for grant potentials, low interest loans for a lot of projects. So for most of the projects we do on a municipal level, we want to entertain the PER and kind of get that project in the queue for potential grant funding. So in parallel with that, we created a PER for the town. The village also created its own PER. So really just to provide a quick background, the town, the village, I think are unique within New York State. The only town within the state that actually has 2 treatment plants in the same community. Certainly for size of this, cities have multiple treatment plants. The way and I'll get into a little bit more, but the way the current configuration is, the village's treatment plant provides treatment up until basically disinfection, and that treated flow is conveyed to the town's outfall, and it's disinfected at the town's outfall and discharged under the town's speedies permit. So currently the village is handled as what's called a significant outside user under the town's speedies permit, which is the permit that the town has with DEC for treatment of the wastewater. So B&L did a report for the PER for the town only option. The village in parallel did that, kind of recognizing that both one option that wasn't evaluated by either the town or the village was having these 2 plants come together, the flows coming from the village and being treated at the town's treatment plant, requiring some additional expansion on the town's end. So we completed our study, the village completed their study, we came forward. I think there was quite a few discussions between the town and the village boards. We came forward back in, I believe, December, presented kind of the proposal. Here's what the work would entail. We've since gone through that process. We've provided the draft report, and we're kind of here to kind of talk about what the results of that were based on the initial presentation we had back in December. So again, this new alternative we looked at is what we call the regional alternative. We like to use terms like regional, certainly when we look at funding capabilities or funding potential. Kind of the buzzwords within the regulatory community now are trying to consolidation with respect to trying to provide treatment of larger facilities to kind of treat common wastewater. So we'll talk about the findings, recommendations, overview of the regional alternative, and the next steps. I did get a sidetrack there with some of the steps. The background, I mentioned 2 treatment plants, the town and the village, both operate separately. The village conveys their flows to the town. It's discharged at the town's outfall, discharged about half a mile into Lake Ontario. At that point where they come together, the disinfection happens with the town provides, basically injects chlorine into their outfall that mixes with the village's effluent. Single permit outflow. So both plants, they're pretty similar as far as the operations. They both include kind of what we call headworks, which is an initial screening stage to kind of remove gross or larger solids from the influent. Primary clarification, which is essentially a settling stage where smaller solids can settle out. Biological treatment, that's where the 2 plants differ a little bit in the means of how they treat biologically. Both are essentially activated sludge type processes. And then secondary clarification. Secondary clarifications is the final settling step. After that is disinfection. So as I mentioned before, the operation, currently there's an IMA, an intermunicipal agreement between the town and the village. That was initially drafted in 1978. It's been updated over the years. I think it was 2009 would be the last time it was updated. Within there's a flow distribution, and that IMA includes some cost allocation for work that the town would do at their plant. Right now, the numbers suggest 5 and 2.5 MGD. One of the questions that during the draft, the review of the draft, is was there actually something in writing that identified 5 and 2.5, and we can certainly vet that. But many treatment processes and many of the cost allocations suggest kind of a 2-to-1 distribution of the actual flows going from the town and the village. Again, the village discharge operates as a significant outside user under that IMA. I've talked about some of the steps here. One thing to note is that within that, when the plan was originally designed back in the late 70s, there were redundant treatment processes incorporated into some of the unit processes the town has. So I mentioned clarification. The town currently operates 3 clarifiers. There's a 4th inactive clarifier that was originally contemplated to be operated by the village in the event of some emergency or redundant capacity. There's also an inactive trickling filter similar to the one that the village has on the town's property as well. And there's some flow distribution along that line as well. So along with that, in the IMA, the final part of that is there's some cost sharing for specific assets within there based on what the specific operation is. There's a distribution, so any capital improvements on the current IMA that the town would address, some of those would have a similar contribution from the village to the town under the current IMA. So we were tasked with what we call a PDR amendment. We had a report, it had been submitted to the agencies. Our amendment really looked at what we call the regional alternative. This is the alternative that we hadn't previously looked at. Taking the raw wastewater flows from the village, sending them into the headworks of the town's treatment plant, upgrading that treatment plant, and then essentially all the wastewater within the entire town, including the village, would be treated and expanded in a slightly larger town treatment facility. In addition to that, we took a harder look at waste solids management within the town, and then also effluent disinfection. Currently, the town has an approved disinfection process, meetings with the DEC that's meeting residual chlorine standards is becoming kind of a hot topic with the DEC. So evaluating that was a requirement on their end in order to kind of look at the big picture for the final picture of the treatment plant. So again, the regional approach included headworks, aeration, settling, primary and secondary disinfection, and solids handling. So our report was amended to kind of take a harder look at disinfection within the town, and then the regional approach as well. And then part of this is really the primary driver, in addition to potential environmental benefits, is really what the costs are. Is to the citizens of the town and the village. What are these costs going to relate to as far as sewer bills? So this is a real quick, just a GIS sketch of the current town collection system. Certainly, this is the town system. This does include portions of Penfield that are drain into the town. The town has an IMA with Penfield. The village is here. The village operates its own collection system, all treatment system. This is an overview of the town's treatment plant. Stepping through the areas highlighted in blue are basically when I previously mentioned the portions of the plant back in 1978 that were included in the design as part of redundant treatment facilities. The large blue circle represents a trickling filter, very similar to the one that the village currently operates. There is some distribution here in this smaller rectangle, and the 2 larger rectangles on the left represent secondary clarifiers and an influent mixing chamber here. These are pretty identical to what the town currently operates. Those are referred as traveling arch clarifiers. Kind of a technology that's not really utilized anymore for clarification. Not real effective. Historically, the town's had some problems with it, and certainly currently, these clarifiers have failed. They're a significant maintenance item for the town. So that's really our initial driver for the initial project we talked about. We'll talk about the phase 1 project. Estimate on the current EDU is about 17,900 total. It includes portions of northern Penfield. There's some diversion that goes on along the west side of the town with diversion structure that the county operates. The 17,900 includes about 14,000 and change of residential. We're gonna refer to EDUs, this equivalent dwelling unit. Just think of an EDU as a household, basically. EDU is not a person, it's however many people, typically two and a half people per EDU. So 14,000 change of residential EDUs, about 12 to 1,500 industrial commercial EDUs within the town, and Xerox does send a portion of their pre-treated industrial wastewater, about 650 EDUs. And again, the combined flows from the village and the town's treatment plants are regulated under the town's speedies permit. So we've had, early on in the process, when we initiated the design process, we did meet with DEC, and DEC really looks at the town as the town is the driver. So any compliance issues, anything like that associated with the village, the DEC ultimately is going to go to the town, and the town really is up. Their position is it's the town's position to regulate treatment on the village's outfall. The village treatment really needs to be regulated by the town. The DEC has indicated they don't have a lot of ability to kind of do inspections within the treatment operations going on in the village plant. This is the existing village plant. Identified a lot of similarities to what we talked about before. The biggest difference is the trickling filters. I can go back real quick. Trickling filters on the village's end. Essentially, it's mixing water with a media, and the media, bacteria grow in the media, mixed with oxygen, treat the organics. The town uses conventional activated sludge process. It's just kind of a snake-like path where wastewater is allowed to pass through. It's aerated as long as going through that snake-like path. The aeration breaks down the organics. What that does create is a lot of solids, mostly the bacteria, the biomass that's generated, and that needs to go through secondary clarification. Those solids settle out. So similar processes to what the village has, minus the trickling filters. I didn't mention solids handling. Both plants operate primary, secondary digesters, different sizes. That's one of the village has recently done some work on upgrading the digesters. The town had done summer work a few years ago. I think in the early 2000s they've done some work on the digesters as well. Essentially, the solids that settle out, they go to the digesters. They are basically allowed to react anaerobically, without oxygen. That reaction creates methane. Basically removes a lot of the, breaks down the organics further, and allows essentially what we call stabilization of solids. Those solids in turn are dried via centrifuges, or in the village case, a centrifuge. They're dried and then they're sent offsite for landfill disposal. I believe that's the village is currently just landfill disposal solids. With the village, we did a similar GIS evaluation, about 1,100 parcels within the village. Population of the village about 5,500. What's kind of unique with the village's treatment plant is currently about 40–50% of their flow is from industrial, pre-treated industrial water from Xerox. That does include a portion of some groundwater that they discharge, as well as a lot of just the wash waters they generate from the toner plant. Just a different way to kind of present what the commonalities are. So the town includes headworks, primary clarification, the settling stage, the activated sludge process, secondary clarifiers, the anaerobic digestion. The village has the similar processes. Again, the trickling filters as opposed to the activated sludge. Talking about Xerox, as I mentioned before, collectively Xerox, all of Xerox's flow, most of their flow currently goes to the village. About 85–90%. The town does receive some of the Xerox flow, about 10–15% of what Xerox is currently handling. So again, there's a lot of commonalities. There's a lot of overlap in the treatment processes. Even though the amount of flow from Xerox, and I talk about treated industrial water or wastewater from Xerox, it's fairly clean water, but there is a large component going through there. But again, the treatment processes are very similar. And they come together, the town disinfects, and that basically, the disinfection, the dosing there, mixes with the village's effluent. That outfall pipe goes through into Lake Ontario about a half a mile. Here's a breakdown, just a pie chart showing the kind of the combination of the overall contributions of flow. So when we talk about wastewater treatment, we talk about flow, we talk about loadings, which is basically the mass of organics. Typically the three parameters we talk about a lot about are BOD, which is biological oxygen demand. That's just a gross measurement of the organic content of wastewater. NH3 is ammonia, and then I'm not showing here is total suspended solids as well. So really what we see here is that with this, you know, again, 65 to 35% of the flow on over on the left really comes from the town. The town does have kind of a proportionally higher loading compared to the village. Primary reason there is the wastewater is probably similar. It's the contribution from Xerox, which is a pretty low strength wastewater. So, you know, we looked at some just ranges, and in general, it's flows are fairly steady. They, you know, just with given development, they are increasing a bit more in the town as additional development kind of comes online. One of the exercises we look when in developing the PER, we look at existing conditions and we kind of do a look forward as far as what's coming down the pike. So we look at, you know, future development. We typically look at a 20 to 30 year growth period with that. So the thing with the village is during the study we sat down with Xerox, we want to get an understanding of what their flows were. And one thing Xerox said is we look at a projection, and Xerox's statement is they pretty much said there was going to be not to include any growth in their wastewater flows. So really when we look at future flows, the Xerox flows that we have currently, the assumption is that they're static. We're not projecting any growth. Within the town, we looked at some historic recent census data on the town. I think the number we saw was about 0.75%. We projected that over the period of the study. Within the village, a lot of what we took is really just information that the village's consultant did for their treatment plant. I think about 4.5% of growth within the village. But with the reality of that is because Xerox is kind of stagnant, we really looked at it's really 2% additional flow coming from the village. So the difference in these slides here, long story short, the difference in these slides here is the town's kind of projected the blue arc, the Pac-Man shape there gets a little bit bigger on projected growth. Really, the town is long-term projected. I think it's works out about 15% over the 20 years. One more way to kind of show the current split. Again, I mentioned this distribution, the 5 and the 2.5. How these numbers are broken through, but looking at EDU contribution, how many. That's really just a function of, on the left, the population base. ADF refers to average daily flow. PHF is peak hourly flow. That's kind of a critical factor. Peak hourly flow is, we talk about ADF, but peak hourly flow is really the design factor we have to look at. Certainly, it's generally driven by wet weather events. Infiltration into the sanitary sewer system, direct inflow into the cross connection of storm sewers. They will lead to additional flows, and in order to kind of meet DEC, the design criteria, we need to design around those peak hourly flows as opposed to kind of average flow. BOD loading and pneumonia loading. So certainly we get here that there's based on the fact that the town really is not taking a lot of diluted wastewater from Xerox. Their BOD, their portions BOD loading is a bit higher. So we can talk about the cost now. So the first thing we looked at is a town-only alternative. This really affects the town. So this alternative assumes that the village would pursue its own upgrade. So really I mentioned before, the phase 1 project that's currently in the bid phase right now. The hope is that we would be in construction in 2019. The overall cost for that is $12 million. I've got that highlighted over on the left. That project includes 3 new secondary clarifiers. They're going to be, instead of these rectangular traveling bridges, they're going to be 90-foot diameter circular clarifiers. It does include necessary backup generation. Currently the town has insufficient backup in the event of power outage. Very small percentage of the plant can actually operate. That's basically a DEC requirement. with that. You know, with the clarifiers, there's additional pumping that needs to be incorporated as well. Along that line, there's some other modifications need to be as far as how the final flows are operated, and it gets into this, the operation of the final effluent is going to be a little bit different than how the town currently operates their effluent, but we think it's going to kind of help them optimize their treatment. After phase one, you know, the long-term needs, phase one really addresses the critical needs. Phase two, the long-term needs would include upgrades of primary clarifiers. There would be the existing activated sludge process. Convert that to a different type of, more of a moving bed bioreactor, which is kind of a hybrid between the trickling filter and the activated sludge process that the town currently has. Additional grit removal, upgrades to the digester, and then inclusion of a chlorine contact chamber. Chlorine contact chamber is kind of key because is slated, you know, we've identified the current inactive village clarifiers as the location for that. All these numbers added up, the $12 million here is included here, to about a $28 million project for just the long-term upgrades for the town. So we looked at the regional approach, which would include, again, it's upgrading the existing town infrastructure, taking the flow from the village, taking that raw wastewater and having it treated at the town. We looked at different alternatives. The one thing we found, part of the exercise we did, we actually went to the village plant, we did a walkthrough, kind of look at their assets, is there anything that has potential for repurposing, just try to understand what's there. The one thing that stood out is when we talk about the headworks, that's the initial flow monitoring, it's a stream, and it's grit removal. It removes the initial solids coming into the treatment plant. Headworks in the village are in pretty good shape. The one thing that we identified is including, our recommendations are including the headworks component of the village treatment plant. It does simplify how the combined flows would come together at the town's facility. We would make that tie-in downstream of the existing headworks. Because that asset's already in place, it does reduce the need for having to include additional fire screens, additional grit removal on the town's end that otherwise would be necessary with the village. So that's certainly from our standpoint, we think there's a significant cost savings with that approach that would require continued operation of that process as a satellite preliminary, call it basically a satellite preliminary treatment step within the footprint of the existing village treatment plant. The mechanism of how that happens, as far as the who operates that, who owns, that's a TBD. We're just really looking at what the operation is. We're not making any any assumptions about who operates it. That would be the next step between the town and the village to kind of work out the details with that. So there's two stages on the regional alternative. I mentioned before about inclusion of the headworks. So there's really two upgrade components. This one would be work that would be necessary on the village treatment plant. It would include the inclusion of the village headworks, the modification of tie-in. There is just a detail here on, there's a fine screen that does need to be upgraded on it's related to the biological treatment process. It does need to be upgraded on the town's end. We propose inclusion of that. We didn't have the cost here, we have the cost elsewhere in the project. Certainly it's a retrofit to that screen, so we can adjust that accordingly. From that, there'd be some sewer work within the treatment plant to kind of make the connections that bypass the existing treatment processes on the village. And then there'd be some additional sewer connections on the town's treatment plant to make the connection to the primary clarifiers. In addition, we've got a cost for demolition of the treatment plant. The demolition cost, we didn't do a detailed demolition evaluation. We used the village's report and we just kind of plugged in those numbers for demolition, recognizing that the village has a consultant that is a lot more familiar with the operation than we were. Modifications to the headworks, they were also part of the village's recommendation, so many of those modifications were pulled from, really include some structural improvements to the plant. I can't remember what, some structural improvements is planned and on that particular building. So we really pulled those costs in for that work. That part of the number was about $2 million for the upgrades on the village plan. We did miss a couple things. The crosshatch is areas that need to be demolished. These are actually, this is a tank, and I believe I'm not sure if that is a tank or not, but those need to be included in demolition. Really, the only thing that's we look at from once the demolition is complete is flows from the village collection system do come in this way. Here's the building we're talking about with respect to the headworks, the preliminary screening, the grit removal, and the red line represents the new sewer connection into an existing sewer. This sewer pipe basically starts out following the back lot, conveyances through the town, but ultimately that's the pipe that ends up in the town's treatment plant. Running down the road off of Phillips Road, if you go down the town, the influent sewer from the town is on the right side and the influent from the village is on the left side, but there's two pipes that essentially run parallel on the town's treatment plant. So this is an all-in number. Again, includes that so we've included that $12 million project into this cost. This would include, this represents work that would be required on the town's treatment plan. So about $34 million. In addition, you'd have the $2 million cost for work that would happen on the village end as well. So the primary additional work, I think the key here is just going back to statements I made about the similarities in the two treatment plants. There's a lot of similar processes. So looking at the additional flow, the additional organic loading with this, one additional primary clarifier, really one additional secondary clarifier, similar to what the town is currently pursuing with the 90-foot diameter clarifiers. Possibilities of additional rosin pumps and piping, we've included that cost in there. What the current town project is, there may be opportunities to kind of eliminate some of those steps as well and increase digester capacity. The organics loading, you have the biological treatment component within the town, the additional organics loading, primarily because it's a lower flow, lower organic loading. Really the only change we had is an additional screen, which that cost is included up here. On the IFAS process here, so that cost would include about $300,000 more for an additional screen required for the specific process we're evaluating. So this is what I'm using blue again. I probably should use a different color, but this is the concept for the final upgrade. This basically, ignoring the blue line, shows what the final phase 1 and phase 2 town upgrade projects would look like. 3 existing primary clarifiers here. This clarifier will be part of the town's phase 2. We'd have a 5th primary clarifier that would handle the additional flow from the village. The 4th circle up here represents kind of that fourth secondary clarifier. The inactive village clarifier here, we've got a concept using that as additional contact time for disinfection, should that be required. I mentioned the tie-in before, so all the plant flow currently comes in this line right here. This is the monitoring station for the plant. This is their initial screening removal stage, this building here. What would happen is, with the concept we've identified, we would bypass this stage, and this is certainly something that needs to be evaluated and designed. Bypass this stage, tie into the primary clarifiers. The benefit to that is, in order to provide additional grit removal and screening capacity, there'd be a pretty significant retrofit within that building. That'd be a pretty significant cost. What our proposal would be to look at, kind of repurpose existing assets to kind of minimize the cost. Obviously, there's a satellite station that's certainly a discussion on future operations of that. Upgrade the solids handling facility. The upgrades for the town only option, the upgrades for the village only option were pretty similar. Really, the main difference is just a larger primary digester tank. walking through the, you know, our estimate on EDUs. So town, the village, the regional. One thing to note is on the village, you know, our estimate was 6,500. The village's report, the PDR, had a slightly higher EDU basis. Their number was primarily based on water consumption as opposed to sewer flows. So I think that's, in order to kind of get to that apples to apples comparison, we kept our numbers based on sewer. That's how we developed the original PDR, so we wanted to maintain that consistency. Certainly to kind of take a hard look at the future numbers. We want to make sure that the villages, you know, the numbers that we need to come up with a number that's consistent with how the town assesses that, and based on wastewater flows and on that end. So this was our takeoff on what these flows look like. We came up with about 6,500 EDU, so slightly less than that. The difference being that's a number that goes on the denominator, the bottom of that equation, when you look at what that user cost ultimately is going to be. Again, EDU, just to talk about EDUs real quick, typically the town sewer law and the village's sewer law as well establish 60,000 gallons per year as what we define as an EDU. That's a pretty standard industry number. On that end, that's basically how Xerox would be billed by both the town and the village. Their total flow divided by 60,000 would be established their EDUs. The village and the town both have established billing rate per EDU. Uh-oh. What did I do? Hit the wrong number. There we go. Wrong button. What's that?
The most important slide.
Yeah. So here's the breakdown. Ultimately, and just to be clear on this, there is a presentation. When we did this, this report was draft. It's been reviewed internally and by the village, town, and the village's consultant. So numbers here, these have gone up slightly from before. So we've since caught that. So basically, what this provides is a breakdown of total costs within the net project cost, total NPV value, which is essentially the long-term cost for operation of the treatment plant. Key numbers are annual debt service, you know, essentially the debt service per EDU. That's a number that each user within the sewer district system would be contributing to the debt service. Year one, operation maintenance, short-lived assets. Short-lived assets are, you know, work necessary to kind of maintain pumps, smaller capital investments necessary to kind of keep the treatment plant operational. And then the estimated treatment charge per user really equates to the users divided by the short-lived, the O&M and short-lived assets. Town-only option, regional option, the differences are about a $7 million higher capital cost with the regional. And then certainly with the town, you're looking at about EDUs of about 17,900,000 with the village. That EDU number is now about 25,000. So one thing we're not showing here is grants. The town has applied for what we call a Water Infrastructure Improvement Act grant. I'm not sure if the village is in the queue. Their project it's called the IUP, Intended Use Plan. I'm not sure if the village has actually applied for any grants. The town currently has a grant application under the WIA program. So we're not showing any WIA grants with there, but typically, you know, some of the pitch with, and Ken will talk a little bit about just kind of the fundability components of this project when two treatment plants come together. Certainly, you know, the concept of regionalization, I use the term consolidation, more of a regionalization approach. That's kind of a sexy term with the funding agencies. They like to hear things like that. It certainly does kind of help with the potential grant applications. There are some lines that we need to, that typically we would automatically trigger that, but with the WIA program, it does seem that they will kind of look at a bigger picture as opposed to just the typical project score. I think that is.
So I get to E first.
So, just to back up to Pete's opening remarks on this thing, this was an opportunity that the town saw as part of their evaluation of their wastewater plant. And the village board not only supported moving forward with it, but also supported financially the efforts that other services to get to this point. So, the intent of the PER is to provide a higher level view of a town-only upgrade versus potentially going towards a regional facility. So this is a starting point. This draft report has been reviewed with the town board and also by the village representatives. So this first box here, this is kind of a flow chart as to how a project like this could progress if the town and the village elect to move forward together on this regional facility. So typically, the two communities would form what's called a project steering committee, which would consist of two, if not three members of each municipality, no more than 2 board members. So you get together in workshops, such as this, and advertise it. So the thought process here is coming off of these initial reviews. As the mayor mentioned, there's a public informational meeting coming out at the end of November. The suggestion would be to get a steering committee together ahead of that meeting with village and town representatives, and actually invite the DEC to that meeting too, so you can hear the regulatory authority's opinion on a project like this versus individual upgrade projects. Make any final tweaks so that the 2 boards are comfortable with what's going to be brought to the public. Have the joint public informational meeting, and at that point, again, it's a very similar presentation, a higher level presentation as to what the potential concepts are for these plant upgrades, and also what are the costs to the respective municipal residents. If the 2 boards following that informational meeting get together again and indicate or feel that their constituents are willing to move forward with a project like this, typically you would draft up a memorandum of understanding, which is basically a brief document that says, whereas the municipalities have developed a joint preliminary engineering report, which recommended moving forward with regional plans, and we're willing parties to moving forward through project development and implementation. So project development in the funding world, as Pete mentioned, is basically having a final preliminary engineering report that you're both comfortable with, submit that to the DEC as well as the Environmental Facilities Corporation, which will typically be your core funding source. Have them approve it from a regulatory and a funding standpoint. You get it listed similar to where you have your project residing now on the intended use plan. And then once you do that, of course you have to move forward with the environmental review aspects of the seeker, what they call seeker, for that. There would be bonding that would have to be put in place, bond resolutions by each municipality, and then ultimately, once those are done, the current IMA would likely be replaced with a more detailed IMA that would speak to this project as to what it is, what's it going to cost total, and how those costs are going to be allocated, who's going to take the lead, who's going to pay who. It would also speak to the concept as to how the plant would be operated and maintained. Once all that's in place, all those items basically become, your preliminary engineering report, your seeker documents, your bond resolutions, all that stuff basically constitutes a full application. You can now fill out the paperwork for a joint project and submit the funding applications. And those would include programs that go beyond the intended use plan or that core ESC financing under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. That would include programs that could be under the Consolidated Funding Application. It could be the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act grant, which Pete mentioned, and then there's a partner grant to that, which is called the Intermunicipal, the IMA, or the Intermunicipal Grant, which a project like this would be the size that we're talking here and people that it affects. That program can provide up to 40% grant for a project like this that brings community and municipal infrastructure together like it's being contemplated. So that process typically is going to take about a year to get from there to here, to the point where you've gone from the concept, you've submitted your applications, you've done everything, and now you're waiting, and you finally hear, okay, how much funding do we have? And the boards can work together to set, what is our target funding? How much grant do we think we need to make this you basically market your project to get those grants. Working together does up your odds of getting higher levels of funding. So once that funding's secured, then the fun part begins. You actually can sit down and put together the design documents and all the permits that go along with that. And then get that reviewed again by the funding agencies that are financing it, as well as your DEC, which is going to have ultimately the final review and approval of a project of this nature. And then you go out to municipal bidding and then construction. So all told, here's where we are right now in late 2018, going through this process, probably somewhere around 2022. So a project like this is minimally, in a perfect world with rainbows and unicorns, you're about a 4 to 5 year project life on something like this. So you're at the very beginning of potential for a project here. So with that, I know there was a lot of technical information that was provided to you here tonight. Certainly, we're open for comments or questions. The village engineer claims here, you can also help out. We're here to answer any questions.
A quick one, Xerox, would the Xerox effluent be coming to a different place, or would it still be directed to the headworks of the village and then on from there?
It could go either way. I think,
You didn't discuss connecting anywhere else.
so just the way we've, the one thing in our report is I guess we've assumed the bucket approach where all the costs, we're not really making, so from the concept we're providing as far as here's the total cost and here's all the users within the town and the village, there ends up being a user cost. So under that approach, that kind of goes inherently along with that, there really wouldn't be an IMA. I guess at that point it would potentially be, one approach would be all the flows go to a consolidated sewer district. At that point,
No, I
it wouldn't
understand
matter
that,
what
I'm just
years.
asking the question. Right now, they have 40 to, if 80% of the Xerox flow comes to the village, okay, it will go obviously into the joint, it'll go to the regional treatment. Is there going to be a design where that no longer comes directly to the village and then travels out from the village headworks to the regional? Will you be connecting the Xerox
It would,
flow in
I
a
think,
different
ultimately
place?
be-
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, that's why we have the question marks there, if you saw that. It's our understanding in discussions with the town that Xerox has the ability to basically, to reverse the flows, to send all the flow to the town if they wanted to. I think one of the benefits that we see now is that you've got a very flat sewer that right now is clean. The wastewater is clean as it goes all the way over to the town plant. Now you're talking about putting raw preliminary effluent through that pipe, so there's more solids in there. The less flow you have in that large diameter pipe, the lower the velocity, the more tendency you're going to see for solids to settle out. So actually keeping the Xerox flows going through your headworks, higher flows, cleaner flow, would help to basically scour or keep that conveyance pipe, that larger diameter pipe, clean. So there may be some benefits, long-term benefits being less O&M on that pipe, and flush it out on a periodic basis.
Going back to your last slide, the IMA and bond resolution, how would they be done separately? Would this not then, if we were to go together, be a single, right? So that the bond is done by the lead entity, and then that cost is then distributed through both?
Yes,
I
no, it's
I
good.
was-
Good question, and that's actually changed over the years. We've done several joint projects over the years for the last probably 15 to 20 years under the old regs. And we've done with as many as 3 municipalities. One of the municipalities takes the lead. In this case, it would be the town. Used to be that one municipality bonded everything. And that IMA bound the other two municipalities in this case to pay their portion of that, which was basically based on how many users based on flow were in the project. Now what EFC requires is there would still be one municipality taking the lead on the project, however, they require both municipalities to have bonds in the proportionate amount of the total project cost. So if it's, 70-30 split, just off the cuff here, and it's a $38 million project, 70% of that would be bonded by the town, 30% by the village. The agencies want to have you both do your bond resolutions, public hearings, and so on. There's some differences here too, in that the town is a sewer district. There's town law that covers what they need to do to move a project like this forward versus village law, and moving sewer project forward under village law.
So would that change then the cost?
Now, the way we
had them, as you had them set out on here, 109, 128, 109, or the 77 and the 88, does that change?
That'd be driven by debt service, that's really
That would be driven by
Well,
the
debt service.
individual bonds?
we've approached it as just simply a portion based on the user rate, the number of mediums.
So typically the project would be bonded by under one listing, let's say, by one agency. So you tend to see terms, I guess. So your bond resolutions would fall under one financing umbrella. You wouldn't have to go out separately and find your own sources of funding that you may have different interest rates. Maybe that's where you're going with this. So we've assumed that a project like this, in order for it to succeed, your corporate boundary basically drops. A unit is a unit, regardless, because you're all getting equal benefit. I think the difference here is that it would be the fact that the village has its own collection system. If there's debt remaining on that or debt on your plant, that would have to be paid for strictly by the village residents moving forward with a project like this, as would O&M with your collection system. Unless you came under one roof for collection system O&M. This assumes for the plant upgrade that all units share equally your own denominator. So that's the debt service across both town and village users. The O&M charge will vary slightly based on what the town has for collection, based on what the village has for collection. Everybody would share equally in the O&M for the plant. Your O&M and your collection systems varies.
So the infrastructure in the village would remain responsibility of the village?
That's to be determined, should you move forward with discussions. We've recently done one of these projects with Watkins Glen and Montauk. It took us 5 or 6 years to get to the point of getting the funding together and get the IMA in place. And part of that process, during that process, they applied for and received local government efficiency grants that looked at, okay, what if we consolidate our collection system? Because Watkins Glen had one, town of Dix had one, which was the racetrack, town of Reading had one, and the village of Montauk Falls had one. And it made total sense to have that, in addition to the regional wastewater plant that serves the two villages and the town areas, to put the collection systems under one roof as well. Both municipalities did pretty major sewer rehabilitation projects to address the IMA and the wet weather stuff. Kind of got the systems on the same playing field, and then they looked at taking them over under one umbrella. There's grants that would pay for evaluation of that to see if that would make sense before you jump into that. Just to evaluate what kind of cost savings you could potentially see if you went in that direction. What you're looking at here is very similar to what you've seen Monroe County do over the years as they've expanded their service area. They're a very, very large organization, have a lot of resources, a lot of manpower. They're slowly taking off some of the smaller plants offline and bringing them into their conveying system to treat at either Van Leer or Northwest. That's the common trend across the state. As costs go up and funding becomes more lucrative, is to consolidate plants like this.
And just to clarify, for this, O&M charge is just for the treatment, it doesn't incorporate the collection system for either
Correct.
town and village.
So the town currently has on their for their sewer charges and the treatment component, and there's a sewer charge, $122.50 and $45, $122 for current treatment. I know the village, I think their current is 120, but we don't, we're not sure what that portion would be. Some of the part of that would be treatment, and the portion that would go to maintenance of the collection system.
I believe the current town charges, if you look at the town tax bill, it's $122.50 for
Okay,
treatment
yeah.
and $45 per thousand for capital. That's debt service and capital improvements. That's how it comes across as a $45 per EDU charge. And looking at the town budget, it also is a sewer capital fund. That's the $45 per unit.
Yeah, so that's the, I think that's what I was
Yeah.
referring to, is the 45 per unit. So there's like, they're broken out two separate charges on that.
Well, it's not collection system and treatment, it's capital and sewer.
Well, so, yeah, I guess collection and sewer, I guess I would look at it, to make the cost to maintain pump stations and go out and clean lines and operate the collection system. The village, I'm not sure if there are any pump, maybe it was on gravity, so I'm not sure if there are pump stations.
We have 3
Okay.
pump stations.
So town is, several, so their cost to operate that's significantly higher, so. Just the cost to operate pump stations.
Right, but I mean, the charges themselves aren't, the collection system is $536,000 a year, which is included in that $122.50. That's a portion of the sewer budget. The $45 per thousand is simply capital charges and not my understanding, reading the town budget, it's not and it has anything to do with O&M costs.
Okay.
So, that's probably a next step that the two municipalities would want to take is, okay, so these are your estimated costs per unit. Well, your capital costs and your per user, your user costs. In addition to that, each municipality has collection systems and whatnot, and existing debt. Under town law, I use the town as an example. For them to move forward with a project like this, or with a project on their own, they would have to do a mapping plan to identify the maximum amount to be expended by their sewer district and an estimated cost per user per year, which would include new debt, O&M, and current O&M, and debt service. Likewise, the village, in all fairness to your users, we want to determine what village residents would pay on top of these projected charges for treatment, capital operation.
So right now, looking at that, if it were town owned, the 128, essentially, although we're at $5, essentially what it is currently. So there's no change to the treatment charge, which I assume is an O&M charge.
Yeah, the current town rate probably some debt service embedded in that. So that's where, I'm not sure how they're getting ready to retire some debt on there, so I think in that there is a bit of debt still in there. I'm not sure
Well,
what the.
I'm saying the 128, it's like Jake just said, looking at the charges on the bill and the O&M, which is operational and maintenance, would be the estimated treatment charge per user is 128, which is essentially what it is right now. So your estimated debt service right now for the town is 45, is that correct on the bill, something along that?
That's the capital fund is
Capital,
$45.
so then that's a difference, so you have a capital, and that's an additional 84?
Yeah, it's basically to pay the bond off. Yeah.
Just a question, if I can, on that, the regional alternative, operation and maintenance and short-lived asset number there, it's 2.6 million. The current town budget for O&M is 2.4 million, and at 3.92 million gallons a day, that gets you to about $1.72 per thousand for treatment cost. And we're talking about increasing the flow with the regional plan accounting for an additional 33% of that flow, but it only goes up by about $200,000, which equates to about 40 cents per thousand treatment cost for that additional flow.
I think what we would wanna I guess, work with Art to kind of better understand what's within his budget on that end. I mean, our number was largely based on, estimates of, there's increased labor, there's certainly, even on that end includes current cost for sludge disposal. Our projections are kind of that long-term additional increase for sludge disposal based on the increased flow, not just with the village, but just the long term. So we're looking at that year end or the end of life, at year 30, where all the projected flow increases are in there. Currently we've pulled out some of their fixed costs that aren't necessarily just administrative costs, that those kind of carry forward. So then, I think we can certainly sit down and walk through what those are and make sure that we're catching everything. I just want to make sure that we're talking apples to apples on these numbers and on that end and how the town currently does it. So it's, I think go ahead.
Yeah, it's inherent with any upgrade too. And the biggest, one of the largest costs at a plant like this, it's activated sludge, is power. And right now, the town has relatively older blowers in here, aerating these aeration chambers. So the upgrade would include putting the fixed film inside of the aeration chambers, as well as putting in higher efficiency blowers on DO controls and variable speed drives. So there's some inherent energy savings as well with the upgrade. In addition to that, you do have some offsetting revenue from continued acceptance of septic at the town facility as a revenue source. So, we need to sharpen the pencils a little bit to see all what's in that budget.
In your report, it says that this is, you would review and assess capability to treat current and projected flows and loads for a 20-year planning period. Our projection went up, I think it was 30 plus, in terms of what we looked at. So if we're looking apples to apples, we'll look out approximately 20 years. Is that correct? Because beyond that, in terms of life cycle and all of those things that we had talked
The
about.
assets, we typically, our assets would, 20 years is the recommended period. Any assets, bond period, we look at 30 years. That's typical for a bond.
For a bond, but you're looking at the life cycle of some of the things that are the treatment and so on, and upgrading your infrastructure and all of that. So there are things that go beyond, not just the bond. I'm not talking about the bond. I'm talking about
the asset.
the actual assets, the structures and all of those kinds of things that are going to be put in place. We were looking at beyond.
Yeah, the pumps and, if it's.
So, I certainly understand. I'm looking at what you have projected, and through the 20 years, we have projections through 20 plus beyond that. So.
I believe we used 30-year life cycle for the MPV.
I think, the MPV was based on 30 years. So the growth
Net present value.
would have been, I think everything was based on, we'd have to go back and check what the actual growth was. It really comes down to what's the future flow. So the MPVs is what that were tied to 30 years. So we've had a 0.75% average for the town over 20 years. That equates to 15%. And for the village, we looked at I think their number was 4.4 over that I believe 30-year period. Which on that end, with the flow in the village, the flow increase is much substantial because of the Xerox being a part of that. They really, we didn't apportion any increased flows to Xerox on that end. So the 4.4 ended up working out to say 2.2% on assuming that Xerox is about half the flow of the village, what the long-term increase would be.
Now, the village is rather limited in terms of its capability to grow. In terms of any additional EDU, and other than something that may go in and Xerox.
It's
a portion over there, whatever. I don't know.
As an engineer, you want to make sure you don't want to make sure it's hard to get that correct number. It's a projection. We kind of looked back and looked at what
curious as to how much more in Penfield the town is willing to take, or is going to take. That seems to be somewhat, well, of course, there's a lot of growth within the town. As we can see in some of the building.
Certainly
things
the,
going on.
what's in the sewer shot of, what's in the sewer shot of the town of Webster, from Penfield. But that growth would really look at, it's all on, so it's the town, the town's collection system, which would include, Penfield. And that growth may come from, both towns' growth has been pretty similar, or historically.
But it seems to be driving right now, along with some of the malfunction or the lifespan of some of the equipment that's there, it seems to be driving the expansion of the town right now. The amount of effluent that's coming, the number.
Well, it's a really good point. I think one thing we focus on the town and the village, but the reality of an IMP, and Penfield has some skin in the game with this project too. So there's certainly, the town has an IMA with the village, and the town has an IMA with Penfield and the county as well. So ultimately all those parties would really need to kind of come to the table on how that.
Are there differences, do you know, I guess I can address one. Are there differences in the cost for a Penfield user as opposed to a town of Webster user?
I don't think there are.
They're all the same? Which drove us to go with the same cost for the town as well as the village, I think.
The close in the Baytown area are actually, really through Ellison Park there, that whole area in the west side of town that goes up through, it goes through a diversion structure. Is that diversion structure, if it's overloaded, it goes over to the town through Van Alstyne Road or that pump station, or does it primarily go to Van Lair, or does it primarily go to the
It
town?
primarily does go to Van Lair, so that's, we've since taken a harder look at that section. There's certainly the fixed areas, just due north of State Road and from here to say Hatch Road, which everything is kind of pretty consistent. But that area over by, I guess I grew up in Webster, I was called a Webster, but in reality it's Penfield.
Yeah.
Most of that really is, there's some overlap on where it's not clear where the sewer is actually going, because I think there's sewer lines that kind of overlap, but I think it's for the most part that is going, as you said, down, it's going downhill towards Ellison Park. Our EDU basis really ultimately came from just what the town's current, billing, who their users are from Penfield and.
So they're going back through Ellison Park, that section of Penfield, a lot of it's.
Yeah, most of this, there's,
County that
can I
way.
tell you right now that this section right here isn't going to the, we're pretty confident this really is flowing here. This is the collection system within, that's pretty much just gravity flowing through here.
Okay. Yeah, so I was trying to look at that from before,
That's a different figure than we have in the report was really an older figure from 2016. We looked at, topography, sewer collection system, and it was just from the county's database, because you've got county's records, Penfield has records. We weren't able to get Penfield's records because we weren't working for Penfield at that time. So that's, ultimately it came down to, we looked at just to kind of simplify the process. What's the town currently billing? Who are they, what's their EDU basis, and that's really where those numbers are.
And it's about 1,000 EDUs for Penfield.
Yeah.
1,050 or something like that, but I don't know if, again, just from watching this and seeing the process and working with Clem, my hat's off to both firms for the work that they put into, it's kind of like deconstructing a snowball, looking at individual flakes and then trying to put it back together and figure out what's gonna happen after, when I'm glad you guys have to do it, not me. That's all.
Well, that projection's always, it's, pro-development or how, if you over-project, you're going to provide a plan that's, could be an unnecessary too high cost, but at the same time, if you don't project enough, then we're having this conversation in 5 more years about the plant's not big enough.
So you mentioned that you think the towns of Webster and Penfield are growing at roughly the same rate.
That's what, historically, that's what it seemed like. I think last year, 2 years ago, the town of Webster was in the headlines because they had the highest growth in Monroe County, but I think, they've been, it seems like they're pretty consistent.
So
Growth here is really just, it's developed, it's where the developments are coming in for the most part.
So for the 20-year planning period, that 15% growth that you're looking at, is,
It's, I mean, everything,
It's
yeah,
gonna
it's,
be
it's
a
within
lot.
those EDUs, so that's, you know, we treated a Penfield EDU as it's Penfield EDU and a town and Webster EDU were pretty much treated the same. So, I mean, that growth could come, and, you know, even with the town, when you look at the map of the town, there's a lot of development in the town that's not, doesn't have sewer on it, so there's, I guess it's additional flows that can reasonably come in, without any, you know, specific growth. It's just, you know, bringing sewer, you know, more sewer to the users. Lake Road, you know, Clem Road, there's portions of Clem Road that don't have sewer, so there's definitely more sewer that can come into the town without any quote-unquote growth, you know.
does that make it more important then between the towns of Webster and Penfield to make sure in the IMA there's some kind of mechanism that if one
Absolutely.
outpaces, one town outpaces the other, that's reflected in how much is charged between the two?
I think it's just so it's the understanding, you know, there's a process in place that identify, you know, when that growth happens and the plants can handle that flow, and then, you know, making sure that the plant's sized accordingly, you know, not necessarily conveyances, but, you know, we're just talking treatment here, but the same would hold true for receiving conveyances as well, so.
One thing to point out on these projected flows, Pete may mention, when you look at designing a wastewater treatment plant, you're looking at many different things. Your average daily flow for a given year, that's gonna be totally subject to the type of precipitation that you get in a given year. Mostly in the spring when your water table's up and you have all the I&I. But, you know, what we'll typically look at is what is that max daily flow, and on average, like in the town, we're projecting about 4.7, right now they're just under 4. That'll go up, that'll more than double on any given day due to wet weather. Same thing in the village, so both systems do have an I&I problem, and, you know, when you get into your collection systems, if you're able to fix that and remove that, you're basically creating capacity. There is a ton of capacity that is taken up right now by clean water. What that does also, if you look at this right here, this peak hourly flow, look at the peaking factors from an average day up to a wet weather day. You know, 21 million gallons per day versus 6 on average. So it's, you know, it's a peaking factor 3 that collectively the two plants see on a wet weather day. And what that requires is 90-foot diameter clarifiers, larger pumps, larger pipes. So you know, you're paying for not only that on the capital side, but you're paying on the operation and maintenance side too to pump and treat and aerate that clean water. So, you know, one of the things that you eventually are going to need to do as your systems continue to age is get out to the collection systems and start to find where those defects are and where that clean water is coming from and address it. That's only going to allow you to.
How much of that runoff from the street drain actually goes through the plant?
Should be done.
It goes separate, right?
You both have separate systems for storm and sanitary. But you know, when they put the older systems in, typically they would build houses that had foundation drains that were connected to the sewer system, and they ran out to a water body before you went to the treatment. So you could have foundation drains, and of course if you've got wet areas, you've got sump pumps, you've got roof drains that people will put into the sanitary sewer because there's no storm sewers available. That's always going to happen, and probably the bulk of your I&I is probably outside of your jurisdictions. It's on the private side. It's in the laterals, it's in the houses, or the businesses versus in your pipes.
And to that point, to the I&I, we have a pretty aggressive grouting schedule that we do every year. And I know we're on our way back through the village, I think about the third time since John couldn't make it tonight, but since he's worked here, going through and doing grouting. But as you mentioned earlier, there's a huge portion of our system that's outside of our control, and that's Xerox with large diameter pipes. And I know doing an evaluation of them about 8 years ago, or 7 or 8 years ago, we were looking at water they were bringing in and water they were sending to the treatment plants. I think they had, at that time, about 800,000 gallons a day coming in and 1.1 million going out. So the groundwater and the infiltration in that system that we would really still have no control over is quite significant. So that's when we were looking at developing a rate for for Xerox, that was one of the things that we tried to do, was provide incentives to them to go back and solve some of the I&I issues, so that you wouldn't have to pump water that you didn't need to pump, or treat water you didn't need to treat, is try to slow down some of that I&I that they have. But it's a pretty vast system throughout the complex and the campus over there, so.
That's the private I&I, that's just Xerox being a large example of it. But
Yeah.
every house,
Oh, yeah, and every lateral,
Yeah,
you
so
know, big pipes over there.
And to your point about the funding, I don't know if you guys have had any discussions yet with the DEC about potentially combining the two systems. Do you think they might push back if they see the peaking factors the way that they are, and force the two communities to address them eye before they look at a regional facility that has a capacity of 21 million gallons?
They may, yeah. We've seen it before, I'm sure you have too. Putting the cart before the horse, and they may the I&I studies ahead of time and get a rehab job on a track to where out ahead of the plan.
One more thing that I've got, speaking about the DEC, and it made me think of the funding. You mentioned the 40% funding. Now, in your experience, I know there's a lot of different, there's a Clean Water Revolving Fund, and the different, all the sorts of different grants and low interest loans and funding that you go to, but you mentioned a 40% grant. Is that 40% typically the hard cost, right? Engineering and other items would be out of it. So if you're looking at a, the $35 million regional, that rather than $14 million, is it, the 40%, that would come out to about $9 million. It'd be the before some of the contingencies, before engineering, and before those administrative costs go into it, right?
So, yeah, I guess to show what Jake is talking about, he ran through the cost estimate, so you've got subtotal construction costs, and then on top of that, you've got the contractor's general conditions, that's all the stuff to get the equipment there, and insurance and bonds and field offices, you add that on top of that. Then totals up to today's dollars, and then looking at the life cycle, when would you start the construction, we inflate that, 3% per year, for in this case, 2 years, and then on top of that is the engineering, legal, and administrative to get you there, and then the contingencies on top of that. And all boils down to what's called the estimated probable project cost. Those grants, these are all eligible costs, and so the grant would be applied towards that full 33.7 million in this case. If you get other grants, certainly you would like to co-fund this. Several sources if you can get it. The WIA grant and the ING will basically consider any other grants you may get, subtract those off the total project cost to come up with a net project cost, and then apply the caps of the 25% or up to $5 million for the WIA and 40% up to $10 million for the ING. So they'll take other funding into consideration.
So the ING has a $10 million cap.
That would be, that would be 40% grant, obviously, it'd be less than that, yeah.
What municipality did we don't know, right? Does that apply to both?
Well, the ING, so, like Pete mentioned, the town has applied for a WIA grant. There's an INA between the two of you, however, they hadn't gotten to the point of being shovel ready for a joint project, so they've only applied for and would be eligible for the WIA grant. Now, if the two municipalities came together, basically it'd be a joint application, submit for, be able to submit for ING grant. One thing they did this year too, that would be the EFC, who administers the WIA grants, is they will not cap the project. You could be eligible for a larger project to get $5 million one year, reapply, get $5 million the next year, and so on to pay for a larger project like this. So, again, we're at the point now of having a draft PR. We did receive some review comments, some initial discussions with Glenn, the village engineer. We need to take a closer look at those. Ultimately, we're under contract to give you each a final PR that is approvable by both boards. So that's our next steps, is to finalize this thing. But again, I would suggest that before we do that, and we get to this point, is let's get together with these smaller steering committee representatives as well as the DEC, just to bring them on board, get their thoughts to make sure that we don't miss anything at this point.
Sounds good. We have a timeline somewhere in mid-November when DEC
Yeah. Preferably prior to November, so it gives us a little time to get anything we need to get together.
Sure, okay. In contact with DEC, they would be.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and call us with any more questions.
Thank you very much, I appreciate you coming and presenting this to us. So we'll set up a time that is agreeable with both the town and representatives there, Glenn, and both of you, each one, and DEC.
Thank you.
Board have anything else you wanted to ask and address?
Copy that over. Oh, yeah. Got a couple things there.
Well, I don't want that just falling apart.
I'm gonna take all that after,
I'm gonna take a good one when I get
so, yeah, I don't blame you.
Well, then, I think that will end the meeting. Our next scheduled meeting is the 8th, and we will be probably continuing a little bit about the discussion that we had, and so we'll be looking to meet on the 8th and also the 20th. So we'll be meeting twice more, and then again the 29th is, and that date, time specifically will be announced, where we will have a joint meeting between the town and the village. It will be held at the town board meeting room, and it will be televised. Okay. If there's no other business, may I have a motion to adjourn? It is now 8:21.
I make that motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is there someone's birthday on this table?
Is there a birthday?
Yeah, there is.
I heard.
Happy birthday, Heather.
Heather. Appreciate you coming tonight.
Yeah, exactly. I'm Nana. Yeah, birthday was all that. And I walked up to him and he's like, yeah. We realized it before my time.
She just opened the mouth and was like, no, you shouldn't.
Yep. Keep them like.